Loneliness is a heavy burden, especially within a marriage. I sat on our immaculately made bed watching Marcos change out of his elegant business suit and into an old soccer jersey. This was the third time this week. My fingers clutched my phone, rereading his message. "Babe, the guys are playing tonight. Let's do the movie another time, okay?" This deviation from our routine was new. It hadn't happened before. The bedroom mirror reflected my figure in the black dress I had chosen specifically for this evening. The soft fabric hugged my curves, accentuating them alluringly without being vulgar. The outfit had cost 2 months of savings, now destined to be wasted on another lonely night. I watched Marcos get ready, his movements automatic and detached, as if I were merely a piece of furniture. "You always do this, Marcos." The words came out with more bitterness than I intended. He barely glanced at me as he laced up his cleats. "Anna, don't start." "It's just a movie. We can go any other day." Any other day? Like last month when his team needed him for the amateur championship? Or a week ago when his friends insisted on beers after work? There was always a reason, always an excuse, and I was perpetually relegated to second place. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty house. Marcos hadn't even said a proper goodbye, just a quick, perfunctory kiss, a mere formality. I stood frozen, feeling the scent of my perfume dissipate, much like my plans for the evening. My gaze wandered around the room and settled on our wedding photo on the wall. A few years ago, he would have sacrificed anything to spend a few hours with me. Now I had been traded for a ball and the company of friends. Disappointment simmered in my chest, mixed with something more dangerous, a craving for attention. I wanted to be desired, to be a priority, to feel the electricity that used to course through my skin from Marcos's gaze. The phone was still in my hand, warm and tempting. Without thinking, I scrolled through my contacts until something made me stop. Antonio, my father-in-law? The photo was old, taken at a family barbecue. Even in that casual shot, there was a certain depth in his eyes, an intensity Marcos had never possessed. My fingers trembled slightly over the screen. The house was filled with a ringing silence, amplifying the thumping of my heart. It pounded wildly, and before my conscience could stop me, I dialed his number. "Hello?" His deep voice answered, sending an unexpected shiver through me. "Antonio." I tried to sound casual, but a treacherous tremor slipped into my voice. "It's me, Anna." The silence on the other end lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. "Is something wrong with Marcos?" The concern in his voice pricked me with guilt. No. Though in truth, I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I was wondering, would you like to go to the movies with me?" Another silence followed, this time heavier and more significant. I could almost physically feel his breath on the other end, imagining him frowning in confusion. "To the movies?" He chuckled softly, and the sound sent a flutter through my stomach. "I haven't been in years." "Exactly," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. "Marcos canceled our plans because of soccer, and I thought, why let the tickets go to waste?" The lie about the tickets slipped out easily, as if it had a life of its own. Antonio hesitated, and for a moment I thought he would refuse. "Are you sure, Anna?" No, I wasn't sure about anything. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to invite my father-in-law on a date meant for a couple. I wasn't sure if it was just a foolish act of revenge against Marcos. I wasn't sure if I could control the inappropriate thoughts already forming in my mind. "Of course," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's just a movie, right?" "Well," he seemed to weigh his words. "In that case, how much time do I need to get ready? Can I pick you up in half an hour?" "I'll be waiting." I hung up and looked in the mirror again. The black dress still accentuated my figure, but now it seemed different, more dangerous, more provocative. I applied a touch of red lipstick, a shade I always considered too bold for a casual movie night with my husband. As I drove to Antonio's house, my heart pounded in my chest. It was a modest suburban home where he lived alone since my mother-in-law's death 5 years ago. I parked the car and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. A daughter-in-law simply trying to cheer up a lonely man, nothing more. But as I got out of the car and headed towards the gate, the sight before me shattered all my attempts at justification. Antonio was in the yard, shirtless, chopping wood under the midday sun. Beads of sweat trickled down his tanned torso. He saw me and smiled, and in that moment, I knew I had crossed an invisible line. There was no turning back. What began as petty revenge against Marcos had transformed into something far more dangerous. The danger escalated with each passing moment. "Anna," he said, tasting my name like a fine wine, wiping his calloused hands with a rag. "I just need to freshen up with a shower. Make yourself at home." As he stepped inside, illuminated by the setting sun like a romantic hero, a question filled with both anxiety and anticipation formed in my mind. What have I gotten myself into? Antonio's home was a reflection of his soul. Simple, cozy, with an air of mystery and countless untold stories. Waiting for him in the modest living room, I looked at the old photographs on the walls. Some were faded with time, others more recent. In one, Marcos and I, young and in love, beamed with smiles. Back then, Marcos still paid attention to me before soccer and beer became the most important things in his world. The sound of the shower echoed through the house, and my thoughts, like unruly children, drifted towards the bathroom. I imagined the water cascading over his muscular body, the one I'd seen in the yard, washing away the sweat of hard labor. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push away these inappropriate fantasies. But Antonio's masculine scent permeated everything, mingling with something elusive that made my heart pound wildly. I nervously stood up and began pacing the room. A stack of books on a bedside table caught my attention. They were old novels, some with notes scribbled in the margins by an avid reader. Marcos had always said his father was too practical for such nonsense. Another facet of his father that Marcos was unaware of. "Sorry for the delay," his deep voice pulled me from my thoughts. Antonio stood in the doorway, his gray hair still damp from the shower. He wore a fitted blue shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. Through the thin fabric, the contours of his toned body were visible, and for a fleeting moment, I wished he had remained shirtless. "Are you a fan of literature?" I asked, gesturing to the books, trying to hide my embarrassment. He offered a shy smile, one I hadn't noticed before. "Your mother-in-law instilled in me a love for novels. She used to say every man should understand a woman's heart, at least a little." His eyes met mine. I think she was right. There was a vulnerability in his voice that disarmed me. Beyond the image of a strong man chopping wood, I saw a person who understood loneliness and unfulfilled dreams. "We should go," I said, my voice huskier than I'd expected. "The movie starts in 40 minutes. In the car, a silence hung between us, filled with unspoken words. In the confined space, I felt slightly dizzy. I tried to focus on the road, but I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, feeling his chest rise and fall with each breath. "How long has it been since you went to the movies, Antonio?" "Since Maria passed," he replied after a pause. "We always went on Sundays. It was our ritual." The mention of my late mother-in-law should have evoked guilt, but instead, I felt a deeper connection to Antonio. How many nights had he spent alone, rereading old novels, reliving memories? Upon arriving at the mall, Antonio seemed out of his element. The modern environment unsettled him. He looked at the self-service kiosks with a bewildered expression, his calloused hands hovering hesitantly over the touchscreen. I stepped closer to help him, feeling the warmth emanating from his body. "Here," I said softly, guiding his hand across the screen. His fingers felt rough beneath mine, scarred from hard work. A shiver ran down my spine at the contrast with my smooth skin. "These modern gadgets," he whispered, his voice too close to my ear. Back in my day, a real person sold you the tickets. Times change, I replied, turning to face him. We stood too close, so close I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes and the silver threads in his stubble. Standing in line for popcorn, I realized how out of place he was here, a man accustomed to open spaces and physical labor, now surrounded by the artificial light of a movie theater. Yet there was a dignity in his posture, a quiet strength that drew the gazes of other women. "What movie are we seeing?" he asked, while I picked out the popcorn. "Something romantic," I replied with a teasing smile, enjoying his surprised expression. "I thought it would suit your literary tastes." He chuckled, a deep laugh that made me shiver. "You're not what I imagined you'd be, Anna." And what was that? More interesting. His gaze met mine, and there was something in it that made me blush. "Marcos always talks about you as if you're just his wife, as if he's leaving out something important, but you're more than that, aren't you?" The question hung in the air, laden with hidden meaning. Before I could answer, our movie was called. Antonio gently placed a hand on my back to guide me to the door, and the touch, even through the fabric of my dress, burned my skin. The theater was almost empty. A midweek showing wasn't popular. Walking to our seats, I heard the rustle of my dress, the sound of our footsteps on the carpet, and Antonio's breathing behind me. We settled into one of the back rows, and the sudden darkness as the lights dimmed seemed to heighten all sensations. The cinema's atmosphere seemed to blur all boundaries of perception. Antonio's hand brushed against mine, resting on the armrest between our seats, making me freeze in indecision. The first frames of the movie flickered on the screen, but my mind was completely consumed by the electric tension that had sparked between us. The cool air from the air conditioning only emphasized the rising wave of warmth enveloping my body. A slight movement from Antonio in his seat, his knee brushing mine by accident, sent my heart into a frantic rhythm. In the dim light of the theater, I noticed Antonio's gaze was not on the screen, but on me. His eyes studied my profile, illuminated by the ghostly light. "Anna," he whispered, and my name on his lips sounded like a daring promise. Turning to him, I realized we were on a threshold, beyond which irreversible changes awaited. The screen's light highlighted the strong features of his face, emphasizing his firm jawline and piercing gaze. In that moment, I saw before me not just my father-in-law, but a man with desires and needs as potent as my own. While the film's characters played out their drama on the big screen, a much more intense and captivating story unfolded in our secluded corner of darkness. In the cinema's dimness, emotions reached their peak. The woody scent of Antonio's cologne mingled with the sweet aroma of popcorn, creating an intoxicating fragrance that told its own thrilling tale. Our hands met in the popcorn bucket, a cliché movie trope that, until this moment, had seemed ludicrous to me. But Antonio's rough fingers, touching mine, sent a wave of electricity through me. He didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he lingered for a moment, as if testing the strength of the invisible connection that had formed between us. On screen, a scene unfolded, depicting a lover's quarrel about constraints and societal conventions. "I shouldn't be doing this." His voice was at my ear, but there was no genuine regret in it. Rather, it was a veiled question, an unspoken invitation. The air between us grew thicker, charged with anticipation. Who would have thought sexual tension could be so palpable? I tried to focus on the film, but his every movement became agonizingly palpable to me. His breathing deepened. His body instinctively leaned towards mine. A romantic scene flared on screen, and the atmosphere in the theater subtly shifted. Perhaps it was just my imagination, but Antonio seemed to be restlessly shifting in his seat as well. "Are you cold?" he suddenly asked, noticing a slight shiver run through my bare arms. How could I explain to him that the shiver had nothing to do with the air conditioning? "A little," I replied evasively, letting the situation unfold. Antonio took off his jacket and, with a tenderness unexpected for his strong hands, placed it over my shoulders. The fabric still held the warmth of his body, and his scent completely enveloped me. For a moment, I closed my eyes, savoring the sensation. How many boundaries could one cross in a single night? Better? His voice was barely a whisper, and opening my eyes, I saw he had moved closer. His eyes, lit by the screen's reflection, studied my face with such intensity that my heart seized. "Yes," I replied, my voice a whisper too. "Much better." A sudden explosive sound from the movie made me jump. He instinctively placed his hand over mine, which rested on the back of the chair, a protective gesture that went beyond simple concern. His fingers intertwined with mine, and neither of us made an attempt to separate them. What had begun as a challenge to Marcos had transformed into something far deeper. I examined our clasped fingers, the contrast between his calloused ones and my manicured nails. There was a story in it, the story of a man who had built his life with his own hands, who knew the weight of labor and the bitterness of loss, a man who, unlike his son, seemed to understand the value of silence. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, gently stroking my palm. How could I put into words the whirlwind of emotions raging within me? "About how everything changes," I replied, and our gazes met in the dimness, conveying far more than words ever could. He nodded slightly, understanding the unspoken. His free hand hesitantly reached out to me, and for a moment I thought he wanted to touch my face. Instead, he brushed a strand of hair from my eyes, a gesture so intimate it stole my breath. The movie continued, but now it served only as a backdrop to the drama unfolding in our hearts. Every breath, every movement, every glance carried the weight of decades of societal conventions and family expectations. Was this the taste of forbidden fruit? Antonio shifted again, and now his thigh barely grazed mine. The warmth of his body permeated the thin fabric of my dress, scorching my skin. I didn't pull away. Couldn't I? Or didn't I want to? "Anna," he whispered my name like a prayer, a plea, a confession. I turned to him, and in the cinema's dimness, our faces were incredibly close. I could see every detail of his face, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the stubble accentuating his lips. Time seemed to stop. The world beyond our small island of darkness vanished. We were alone in this moment of boundless possibilities. Who would make the first move when two hearts danced on the edge of an abyss? In the dimness of the auditorium, a flame of passion ignited, as if testing the boundaries of what was permissible. His hand, as if by accident, began its ascent along my arm, leaving a scorching trail of desire. Every touch was a silent question, every caress a timid plea for consent. My body, obeying an unknown force, yearned towards him, like a flower craving the sun. On screen, the film's climax unfolded, while in our secluded corner of darkness, we confronted our own demons and temptations. "This is madness," I whispered, but there wasn't a trace of conviction in my voice. "Life is woven from madness," he replied hoarsely, restrained desire simmering in his voice. "They're what make us feel truly alive." His words echoed in my head, intertwining with the muffled sounds of the film. Somewhere far away, Marcos was likely engrossed in his soccer game, oblivious to the impending changes that would forever alter his world. But here and now, in this moment, there was no room for thoughts of Marcos. Something forbidden and irresistible was brewing. The question was no longer if we would cross the line, but only when. The atmosphere in the cinema intensified, as if the darkness itself had conspired with our desires. Antonio intertwined his fingers with mine, his thumb tracing hypnotic patterns on my skin. Each touch seemed to awaken nerve endings I hadn't even known existed. In this darkness, we were just a tangle of suppressed feelings and insatiable longing. "Do you know what I miss most?" Antonio whispered in my ear, and his deep voice sent shivers down my spine. "The feeling of anticipation. That moment before something important, when your whole being vibrates with expectation. His words mirrored my own thoughts. I turned to him, and in the ghostly light, his eyes burned with an almost predatory gleam. Before me was no longer Marcos's gentle father, but a man consumed by the same all-encompassing desire as me. "What next?" I dared to ask, my voice huskier than ever. He brought his hand to my face, his calloused fingers tracing my cheek. The contrast between the roughness of his hands and the tenderness of his touch made my heart pound wildly. "This," he replied. The film continued its narrative on screen, but in the shadows we were creating our own story. Antonio moved closer, and I felt the warmth of his body mingled with the woody scent of his cologne. I no longer knew whose tremor shook me, mine or his. "Anna," he whispered my name, as if confessing something deeply intimate. "This isn't just about getting back at Marcos, is it?" The question hung in the air, laden with hidden meaning. At some point, Marcos had ceased to be the main factor. This was about something deeper, an intuitive desire that transcended simple revenge. "Yes," I confessed, and a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. It was something more. His hand slid to my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. The touch burned through my entire body with a wave of warmth. "We should stop," he said, but his actions contradicted his words. His fingers gently massaged my neck, sending sparks of pleasure down my spine. "Probably," I agreed, leaning even further into him. The air between us was electric. Every breath was a synchronized dance of desire and hesitation. The world beyond our small, dark refuge ceased to exist. Only the two of us remained, captives of a moment of endless possibilities. Antonio turned his whole body towards me. His hand found my waist, and even through the fabric of my dress, his touch burned. Years of manual labor had made his palms rough, yet his movements were surprisingly tender, as if he were touching something precious and fragile. "Do you understand what you're doing to me?" he whispered hoarsely, and his words ignited a fire of desire in my belly. In response, I ran my hand along his arm, feeling the muscles tense beneath the fabric of his shirt. He flinched at my touch, and that barely perceptible tremor revealed how profoundly our closeness affected him. "I understand just as well what you're doing to me," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. The sounds of the film seemed distant, as if we were in another dimension where only sensations mattered. The cool air of the air conditioning caressed my exposed skin, creating an exciting contrast with the warmth emanating from Antonio. His hands cradled my face with a reverence that stole my breath. His thumbs gently brushed my lips, and I closed my eyes, dissolving into the sensations. When I opened them again, his face was very close, his gaze was fixed on my lips. "This will change everything," he warned. "Then some things need to change," I replied, tangling my fingers in his silvering hair. Time seemed to slow. Flashes of light from the screen intermittently illuminated our faces, creating a play of shadows that made the moment even more surreal. Antonio leaned in closer, and I felt his warm breath on my lips. The final step. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me towards him. I reciprocated, closing the last distance between us. Our lips met in a kiss whose intensity surprised me. The experience shook me to my core. The kiss burned with the taste of hidden desires and unspoken vows, a fleeting chance to right the past and hope for a brighter future. His hands like a vice tightened around my waist, deepening the sweet captivity, and an involuntary moan escaped my lips. That sound, it seemed, momentarily brought him back to reality. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. His pupils were dilated, betraying an unquenchable thirst. "We need to get out of here," he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely recognizable. But now it was impossible to stop. With the forbidden fruit finally plucked, she pulled him closer, her fingers tangling in his hair, and their lips merged once more in a passionate dance. This kiss was full of urgency and insatiable hunger. His hands roamed her back, sliding towards her waist, leaving a fiery trail. On screen, a long-forgotten story unfolded, but in the dimness of the cinema, their own was being born. A tale of forbidden passion and inevitable consequences, of a choice that couldn't be undone, and moments that couldn't be forgotten. And in this whirlwind of feelings, there was only one certainty. After this evening, the world would never be the same. The credits announced the end of the film, but their personal drama was only just beginning. The lights in the theater slowly came up, bringing them back to harsh reality. Antonio and she reluctantly broke their embrace, their bodies still trembling with surging energy. A trace of her red lipstick remained on his lips, a piquant detail that brought an involuntary smile to her face, making the experience even more tangible. "It's time," he whispered, his voice still trembling with arousal, but his eyes held something else, a mix of satisfaction and anxiety that made her heart clench with foreboding. On the way to the car, they maintained a respectful distance from each other, as if hoping that physical separation would quell the storm of emotions. The night air was pleasantly cool against her heated skin, and every gust of wind seemed to whisper memories of his touches. "Do you regret it?" he asked once they were settled in the car, his gaze piercing her. "No," she answered truthfully. "Do you?" Antonio reached out and gently touched her face, his calloused fingers tracing her jawline. "How could I regret the most exhilarating moment I've had in years?" The drive home was charged with electricity. Every red light became a sweet torture, offering a chance to exchange glances full of unspoken words. His hand brushed her thigh intermittently, each touch leaving an invisible burn on her skin. As they pulled up to his house, the silence became unbearable. The car engine hadn't even cooled when he turned to her, his eyes darkening with restrained desire. He was about to say something, but she cut him off with a kiss. She didn't need explanations or justifications. She just wanted to feel his lips on hers, his hands exploring her body, the warmth of his skin. This kiss was different from the previous ones. It lacked the desperate urgency of the cinema, replaced by a controlled passion that promised something more. "Shall we go inside?" he offered between kisses, his voice laced with both longing and playfulness. "Probably," she agreed, but didn't move. Her hands roamed across his chest beneath his shirt, feeling his muscles tense in response to her touch. When they finally pulled apart, his eyes gleamed, making her tremble with anticipation. "Will this be our secret?" he asked, his hands still on her waist. "Yes," she confirmed, with a mischievous smile. "But perhaps not our last." Antonio let out a deep, satisfied chuckle that sent shivers through her body. "You're dangerous, Anna, and you like it." He pulled her in for one last kiss, deep and possessive. Even when he released her, the taste of his lips still lingered on hers, the warmth of his hands on her skin. Marcos was probably still enjoying himself with his friends, oblivious to the transformation that had occurred in his absence.